Joining me now is Superintendent of Schools Jack Dale. Welcome.
Thanks.
Well, the school board recently passed a policy change that I think it's important for our viewers to know about, and that was about schools having the option of installing interior surveillance cameras. Right. Now, tell us a little history on this.
Well, a couple strands. One is, first of all, we are one of the few districts, in fact, maybe the only one in the greater Washington, D.C. area that has not permitted interior cameras in schools. Some of our board members in the past have just been against, thinking it was more of an invasion of privacy and just didn't want to allow cameras in the interior except in some very unusual circumstances. So we've had them on the exterior buildings for quite a few years, and it's really reduced vandalism. It's also helped in post hoc investigations where actually the police department had something going on in the neighborhood and they've asked for a copy of the tapes. We don't have anybody monitoring those tapes, and so we just save them for a period of time and then review them if necessary. And we've had cameras on our school buses, which has really helped minimize discipline issues, and if there are some incidents on the bus, we can quickly investigate, find out who the child is that we need to have a conference with his or her parents and bring them in, show them the tape, and then really gets quickly resolved. So a little history of some of the other camera usages. And then our principals this last spring had experienced in a couple of our schools some fairly dangerous, what we'd call food fights or disruptions in cafeterias. Right. So much so, some of our other students were traumatized. Right. Some special needs children were very traumatized, and the teachers then had to go through almost a behavior modification to get them comfortable to come back into the cafeteria. So not a healthy environment at all.
Right. Not something, not a fun food fight that you might see on Animal House
or
exactly.
something. Yeah, not at all. Not really a little innocent one. And then the notion of flash mobbing, which now exists in society throughout the world, was beginning to exist in some of our schools, where kids were texting from one school to another school and creating incidents. So the principals approached the school board and said, we believe that having surveillance cameras in our cafeteria and some hot spots would help us deter, we hope, and if it didn't deter, at least help with the investigation afterwards, because they were not able to determine who the culprits were, if you were.
Right. Hotspots meaning general common areas.
Yeah, large gathering areas, outside of gymnasiums. Let's say, when you have crowds coming in and out for basketball games and that sort of thing. Common areas, large common areas where there are a bunch of lockers and that sort of thing.
But not bathrooms.
Oh, heavens no.
Or classrooms.
Not classrooms, bathrooms, or small hallways and that sort of thing. So it's just general, large congregation areas. So. Long story short, the principals asked this summer, asked the board to consider a change, and we had two of our school board members bring it forth in their process with the board, and then the whole board said, yes, let's look at this. And so then we prepared some information, background, and tried to look at, are there data points that we could collect on this one to see if we have interventions that would be, or problems that would be reduced. Or we don't really track how long it takes to investigate, so it's hard to really document that.
Right. And so the board approved it with a stipulation, and that is that individual schools have to do some pretty comprehensive community engagement.
Yeah, the board basically now made it permissive, not required. And so any high school, if they wish to put in surveillance cameras, must work with their community, the parents, the kids, and the faculty, around when, where, how. And if there's general consensus agreement from all parties, then we would grant permission for that school to be able to use it.
Right.
Put in the installing surveillance cameras.
Right. And then, in addition, they also want some data being collected as they, if they choose to install the cameras, which will be reported back to your office.
Yeah, and we're going to try and let each school identify what that data might be. Some of those schools that have had some of these food fights or altercations can clearly then document pre and post. As I mentioned, we don't document the amount of time it takes to investigate. So that one, they may try and do that at least to show that how quickly things can be investigated afterwards. As I mentioned, there's nobody watching live feeds.
So,
it's simply being recorded. And then those are destroyed after probably, I think it's 30 days or something like that. But in the interim, if something needs to be investigated, then you can resurrect the DVDs.
And I think a good point to make is this doesn't replace human beings. I mean, there's still going to be the same number of people in the cafeteria monitoring the cafeteria. It's just an additional tool in the toolbox.
It really is, and that's what many of our board members said. It's an additional tool in the toolbox for our school-based administrators. And yeah, they'll still be there. working with the kids. It's a great social time to deal with issues
Yeah.
and counsel kids and that sort of thing. But
Yeah.
we also need and expect kids to behave themselves, and like you say, it's an additional tool in their toolbox.
Right, and we welcome parents to come in and to volunteer
absolutely,
to do that
absolutely.
as well.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Good. Well, thank you for sharing that information.
Thanks.